The story begins in darkness, a world locked in ice and silence. Somewhere, deep in a stone cave, a flicker dances, a trembling flame, barely alive. It crackles against the damp air, painting the walls with gold and shadow. Around it huddle figures cloaked in animal skins, the first humans, fragile and fierce, discovering a force that will one day reshape the planet. The night outside is merciless. The wind howls like an ancient beast. Snow drifts across the mouth of the cave, and every breath fogs the air like a ghost. But within, something miraculous burns, a gift stolen from lightning, tamed by trembling hands. For the first time, warmth spreads through the tribe. Fingers thaw. Fear fades. And as the flame flickers in their eyes, something deeper ignites. Hope. Fire was not just heat. It was life, safety, and power. To the first humans, warmth was magic, a promise from the gods. They fed it twigs, bark, bones. They sang to it, danced around it, and feared losing it. Every ember became sacred. Without fire, there was death. With it came the first revolution. It turned night into day, predators into prey, and hunger into feasts. Around these first fires, language was born, stories were told, plans were made. Archaeologists call them hearths, but in truth, they were the heartbeats of early humanity. The Ice Age tested every creature on Earth, but humans didn't just endure, they adapted. They learned to build stone circles around their fires to preserve the heat. They carved vents into cave walls to let smoke escape. They discovered which woods burned longer, which stones cracked under flame, and which soils could contain embers till morning. Still, warmth was fleeting. Every dawn the fire died and fear returned. Imagine waking in the dark, breath freezing in your throat, fingers numb and brittle. The tribe's survival depended on one glowing coal buried in ash overnight. If that ember went out, someone had to journey into the frozen wild to find fire again, perhaps from a lightning strike, or another tribe willing to share. The price of warmth was life itself. Over generations, humans became fire's engineers. They dug pits deeper into the earth to shelter flames from wind. They lined them with stones to store and radiate heat. Some realized that narrow channels, small trenches cut into the soil, could direct warm air from a fire pit into nearby sleeping spaces. Primitive, yes, but this was the first spark of controlled heating. These weren't mere survivors anymore. They were inventors. They began to build huts and shelters around the concept of warmth. The fire no longer sat at the edge of life, it sat at the center. Roof openings became chimneys, clay ovens doubled as heaters. Entire family structures formed around a single flame. And from that moment forward, civilization would always be built around heat. As centuries passed, fire evolved beyond necessity. It became spiritual. In ancient rituals, shamans carried burning embers across vast lands to bless new villages. Kings and priests guarded sacred flames that symbolized divine favor. To control fire was to command the gods themselves. In every culture, Greek, Persian, Indian, Egyptian, fire had a name and a soul.
It represented purity, knowledge, and life. The Vedic texts spoke of Agni, the god of fire, the bridge between humans and deities. The Greeks had Prometheus, who stole fire from Olympus to gift mankind its first power, and paid dearly for it. Every myth was an echo of truth. Our survival began with heat. As humanity moved from wandering to settling, the hearth became the first true technology of comfort. Mud brick homes replaced caves. The central fire pit evolved into the first domestic hearth, stone-lined, carefully ventilated, and symbolic of family unity. Archaeologists have found remains of these hearths in Jericho, Çatalhöyük, and the plains of Anatolia. Proof that warmth had become as important as food or water. The hearth was both an invention and an altar. Its smoke curled through the ceiling hole, marking the rhythm of daily life. It baked bread, boiled water, and gathered hearts around its light. And though no one called it heating, it was the first step toward mastering indoor climate, the birth of comfort. But progress never lasts unchallenged. As climates shifted and winters grew harsher, fire alone could no longer keep large shelters warm. Families built bigger homes, but their hearths stayed the same. Smoke filled the air, burning lungs and blackening walls. People began to dream of something more, a way to warm entire rooms, even entire buildings. A way to control heat, not just contain it. Unknowingly, these dreams laid the foundation for what would become central heating. The idea that warmth could flow, travel, and be engineered, like water, like wind. For tens of thousands of years, humans waged a silent war against the cold. Fire was their only ally, but also their greatest burden. It demanded constant feeding, constant care. It smoked, it burned, it killed. Yet still they knelt before it, generation after generation. Because within that fragile flame burned the essence of humanity itself, the refusal to surrender. And though no one could have known it, deep within that struggle was the spark of something greater. A vision that one day warmth would flow unseen beneath stone floors, rise through walls, and cradle the air of empires. That day was still far away, but the first chapter of the story of the first central heating system in history, began right there, in that cave, with that trembling flame. The smoke curled slowly upward, tracing its way through a hole in the roof of a clay hut. Outside, dawn broke over the edge of a small Neolithic village. Mud walls, straw roofs, and the faint smell of yesterday's fire still lingering in the air. Inside, the hearth glowed like the heart of the home, casting a dull orange light over the sleeping family. This was the moment when fire stopped being just a tool of survival and became part of living. It was no longer just about keeping the cold away. It was about belonging, comfort, and the rhythm of human life. The people who once wandered the frozen plains had begun to settle. They built homes from the earth itself, mud brick walls, plastered with clay, sometimes reinforced with straw or reeds. In the center of these structures sat the hearth, a simple pit of stones and ash. Its warmth diffused slowly across the floor. Women cooked on it, children warmed their hands by it, and elders told stories in its light. The house was no longer just shelter from the storm. It was now a living organism, with the hearth as its beating heart. In these early villages, fire was communal. The first settlements, such as Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, built clusters of homes connected almost like cells in a body. When one family's fire went out, the next-door neighbor would share a glowing coal wrapped in bark or clay. Warmth became not only a comfort, but a social bond. To share fire was to share life. It was a symbol of trust and friendship, a connection between families. And so, fire became the foundation of civilization, not in the forge or the battlefield, but in the simple act of keeping each other warm.
The hearth shaped the architecture of early homes. Builders began experimenting with different materials to better trap heat. Stones absorbed warmth during the day and released it slowly through the night.
Clay sealed in the heat and prevented wind from creeping through the cracks. The floors became smoother, cleaner, and closer to the earth. As fire grew tamer, homes grew smarter. The first attempts at insulation were born. Animal hides stretched across openings, straw mats on walls, and sometimes layers of ash or sand beneath the floor to prevent the cold from seeping in. The air inside those homes was thick, sometimes choking. The smoke from open fires filled every corner. Soot covered the walls, staining the ceiling black. The people coughed, but they endured. The few clever minds began to realize that smoke could be guided, that heat and air could be separated. Small openings were cut high into walls or roofs, primitive chimneys, the first of their kind. Over time, they became more refined, narrow flues made from clay or stone, designed to draw smoke upward while keeping the precious warmth below. It was a small change, but a monumental step toward controlling the environment inside a home. The first builders didn't have blueprints, but they had instincts. They noticed how the placement of the hearth changed the feeling of a house. Too close to the wall, and smoke would escape through cracks. Too close to the center, and heat would dissipate too quickly. So they learned balance, geometry born from trial and error. The design of the home evolved around the fire, and soon fire began to shape the very identity of human living space. A good home was not one that merely stood strong, it was one that stayed warm. At night, the flicker of dozens of fires could be seen across the plains. From a distance, it looked like the stars had fallen to earth, settling among the people who had dared to build. The hearths burned in the silence, but they told a story. The story of humans taming nature, one ember at a time. The cold was no longer the master. The warmth, though fragile, was under human command. In these fires, the seeds of engineering were sown. Some villages built shared heating structures, large communal ovens or stone furnaces that served multiple homes. Women would bake bread in them, but the heat they produced also spread through the walls, keeping the nearby homes warm for hours. Without realizing it, they were experimenting with heat transfer, conduction, and radiant warmth. Their goal was simple: to make the most of every bit of energy fire gave them. Yet their creativity hinted at the birth of a science, the science of heating. And as generations passed, warmth became synonymous with home. It became emotional, symbolic, sacred. The fire was tended not just for necessity, but for meaning. People began decorating their hearths with stones, carvings, and idols. They believed that spirits lived in the flames, protecting their families. Festivals revolved around fire, rituals honored it, and myths spoke of it as divine origin. To lose the fire was to lose the soul of the home.
The world outside was still wild and untamed, but inside the home, humanity had created a microcosm of safety. The warmth of the hearth turned long nights into gatherings, silence into laughter, fear into comfort. It was in these moments by firelight that culture was born. Songs were sung, stories told, tools invented. The fire became the teacher, the witness, the quiet observer of humankind's rise. But not all homes were equal. The wealthier or more resourceful families built larger hearths, using better stone, placing them strategically to heat adjoining rooms. Some built their hearths against thick walls that stored heat and released it gradually. The poor, meanwhile, made do with shallow pits and smoking fires. Warmth became, subtly, a sign of status, a whisper of the inequality that would one day define empires. Seasons changed, and with them came the evolution of heating practices.
Some communities began to dig trenches beneath their floors, channeling warm air from a nearby fire pit into their homes. It was crude, imperfect, and often smoky, but it worked. The first underfloor heating experiments had begun long before anyone would call them that. The concept of distributed warmth had entered the human imagination. Generations would pass before the world saw the grand marvels of Roman engineering. But here, in these humble clay homes, the idea of controlled heat was born. Humanity had learned not only to make fire, but to think about it, to study its flow, its strength, its life. The spark of survival had turned into curiosity. And so in these small, smoke-filled homes, the dream of warmth evolved into the dream of mastery. The hearth, the humble ancestor of furnaces and radiators, marked the beginning of an unbroken chain, a story of innovation that stretched from the ashes of ancient villages to the marble palaces of Rome. The villagers didn't know it, but their fires had started something far greater than they could imagine. The long, winding journey toward the world's first central heating system. The desert sun blazed across the horizon, setting the sands of Egypt aflame with light. The Nile shimmered like a vein of molten gold, feeding life into the heart of civilization. But as the sun dipped beyond the dunes, the warmth that scorched the day fled quickly, leaving behind a chill that crept through the mud-brick homes and stone temples. The people of ancient Egypt lived between extremes, burning days and freezing nights. And in that contrast, they learned to master the art of balancing nature itself. They were not merely builders, they were scientists of stone and sunlight. Their temples, tombs, and homes were designed with an intuitive understanding of heat. Every wall, every window, every shadow was part of a grand equation, an architectural dance between light and darkness, warmth and coolness. For the Egyptians, warmth did not come from fire alone. It came from the sun, the eternal god Ra, who crossed the sky each day, bringing life to the earth. Theirs was the first civilization to harness heat not through flames, but through the heavens themselves.
In the cities along the Nile, homes were crafted from sun-dried mud bricks, chosen not for beauty, but for function. These bricks absorbed the intense heat of the day and released it slowly through the night, creating a natural balance. The walls were thick, their color pale, reflecting light and storing just enough warmth to keep families comfortable when the temperature dropped. The architects of these homes may not have known the physics of thermal mass, but they understood it instinctively. They were practicing the earliest form of passive heating, a kind of natural central heating powered by the cycles of the sun. At dusk, when the air cooled and the stars appeared, the heat radiating from the walls turned homes into small sanctuaries. Mothers tucked their children beside the inner walls where it was warmest, and elders gathered in corners that still held the day's sun. Fire was used sparingly, not for heating, but for cooking and light. The Egyptians had achieved what few civilizations could. They built warmth directly into their architecture. In the grand palaces and temples, this mastery of heat reached near perfection. Take the temples of Karnak or Luxor, massive structures designed not only for worship, but also for climate control. The architects aligned entrances with the sun's path, allowing morning light to pour in and warm the great halls, while keeping the interiors shaded during the hottest hours. The stone floors remained cool by day and warm by night. Deep inside, where the sacred rituals took place, the temperature was steady, neither burning nor freezing. It was as if the builders had trapped the very breath of Ra within the walls. Even tombs reflected this understanding. The ancient Egyptians believed the afterlife should be as comfortable as the living world.
In the Valley of the Kings, engineers carved chambers deep into rock, where heat from the day filtered gently through stone. Some chambers stayed warm for weeks after the workers had left, their walls storing the desert's fire. The tombs were silent, yet they carried the memory of warmth and eternal comfort for the dead. But it wasn't just the wealthy who benefited from this knowledge. In small farming villages along the Nile, families designed their homes with clever precision. Roofs were made flat to capture sunlight during the day. At night, people slept on them under the stars when the air cooled. Courtyards were built to trap breezes in summer and sunlight in winter. Openings were placed opposite each other to allow air and heat to circulate naturally. Every home was a living machine, breathing warmth and releasing it as needed. As civilization flourished, Egypt's relationship with heat became almost spiritual. The priests taught that warmth was divine energy, the life force of Ra. To live in harmony with the sun was to live in balance with the universe. Every sunrise was a blessing, every sunset a reminder that warmth, like life itself, was fleeting. It had to be preserved, respected, and designed into every aspect of living.
One of the most fascinating inventions of this era was the use of hypocaust-like principles in bathhouses and temples. Although not as advanced as those that would appear later in Rome, some Egyptian structures used raised floors and hollow spaces beneath them where hot air from small fires could circulate. Clay pipes carried warm air or smoke from ovens into rooms where priests bathed or performed rituals. The heat was indirect and gentle, designed to purify rather than burn. These were among the first known experiments with controlled, distributed heat, an early whisper of the central heating systems that would one day change the world. The engineers of the pharaohs were master observers. They noticed how materials behaved under the sun's gaze, how limestone cooled too quickly, how granite retained warmth, how sand trapped heat long after dusk. They used this knowledge to design not just comfort, but permanence. The pyramids themselves, though monumental tombs, were feats of thermal engineering. Their massive stones absorbed sunlight during the day and released it slowly, preventing the internal chambers from becoming unbearably hot. The temperature inside a pyramid remains remarkably constant even now, thousands of years later, a silent testament to their genius. In the temples, sacred fires burned to honor the gods, but they were more symbolic than functional. The true warmth of Egypt came from its architecture, its alignment with the natural world. The builders didn't fight against nature, they worked with it, bending its forces to serve human life. It was this harmony, this quiet dialogue with the sun, that set Egypt apart from every other civilization of its time. As night fell over the Nile, the last glow of the sun faded from the desert. In the distance, a small family gathered around their home's inner wall, still warm from the day. A mother pressed her hand to the bricks and smiled, feeling the gentle heat beneath her palm. It was more than comfort, it was connection. The same warmth that had touched the pharaoh's palace now warmed her child's sleeping face. Egypt had turned the sun into its servant, and warmth into an art. Without realizing it, the people of this golden land had laid the foundation for the science of heating, a legacy that would travel across continents and centuries. Their designs, their homes, their understanding of light and heat would one day inspire others, Greeks, Romans, and the builders of the future, to dream of a world where warmth flowed not from the hearth, but through the very bones of architecture itself. And so, as the desert winds whispered through the palm trees and the stars shimmered above the sleeping Nile, Egypt stood as the first great teacher of heat. They had proven that warmth did not always come from fire. Sometimes it came from brilliance. The Aegean wind carried the scent of salt and olive through the marble streets of Athens. The sun, once again the giver of all life, rose above the Acropolis and painted the white stone buildings in gold. But as beautiful as Greece was in daylight, its nights could be cruel. The marble that gleamed under the sun turned cold and unwelcoming after sunset. The chill crept through columns and across floors, and in those long hours between dusk and dawn, the people of Greece began to seek not only light, but lasting warmth. Fire had already shaped human civilization, but the Greeks were among the first to treat it not as a mystery, but as a problem to be solved. They looked at heat through the eyes of philosophers, mathematicians, and engineers. What was warmth? How did it move? Could it be controlled? They asked questions no one had asked before, and in doing so they took humanity's first steps towards scientific understanding of heat and comfort. In the cities of Athens, Corinth, and Sparta, homes were small and practical. A single central hearth often stood in the middle of a courtyard, providing heat, light, and a place to cook. But even here, innovation began to spark. Builders noticed that heat from open fires escaped too quickly through open courtyards and uninsulated walls. So they began experimenting with new designs: partially enclosed hearths, raised floors, and vents to manage smoke. Slowly, the architecture of warmth evolved. Greek engineers understood that heat could be guided, that air could move through deliberate paths. Some of the earliest attempts to warm entire rooms appeared in public bathhouses, where warm air and smoke were channeled beneath floors or through walls. These early systems were the forerunners of Rome's great hypocausts. Though simpler and smaller, they proved that heat could travel and that buildings could be designed to contain and distribute it. In these Greek bathhouses, known as balaneia, the concept of comfort went beyond hygiene. They were social centers, places of philosophy, discussion, and rest. Patrons would enter cold rooms first, then move to the warm ones, built over furnaces tended by servants below. The floors were supported by short pillars, allowing hot air from the fires to circulate underneath. The walls, lined with clay pipes, carried the same warmth upward, radiating gentle heat into the rooms. It was not as powerful as later Roman systems, but it was a revolution in thinking. The Greek engineers didn't see themselves merely as builders. They were thinkers, guided by proportion, harmony, and logic. Men like Philo of Byzantium and Hero of Alexandria studied how air moved and how heat flowed. They wrote about fire, water, and pressure, laying the intellectual groundwork for mechanical heating. In temples and public spaces, they experimented with controlling sunlight through architectural geometry, aligning doorways and columns so that beams of light and heat reached deep into chambers during winter months. The Parthenon itself, though not a heated structure, was a masterpiece of environmental design. Every line, every opening, considered how light and warmth interacted with space. Greek houses followed the same principle of balance. Builders designed them to breathe in summer and retain heat in winter. Thick walls kept out the cold, and wooden shutters trapped warmth during long nights. The hearth still remained the soul of the home, but its role was evolving. It was no longer the only source of heat, but part of a larger system of design. Fire, architecture, and intellect began to merge. In winter, families gathered near the central hearth, their faces glowing in its orange light. The walls reflected the faint warmth, and smoke rose through an opening above where it met the chill outside. It was simple, imperfect, but deeply human. Each home was a tiny experiment, a prototype for a more comfortable life. And as Greek knowledge spread,
So did their ideas of heating and architecture.
The concept of radiant warmth fascinated the Greek mind. They observed how the sun's rays could heat stone, and how the same stone would stay warm even after sunset. Philosophers like Aristotle pondered these effects, describing heat as a form of motion, a kind of energy passed from one object to another. Though they lacked modern science, their insights were astonishingly close to truth. They realized that the world itself was a vast system of heating and cooling, a balance between elements. The connection between fire and spirit was not lost on them either. The sacred flame in Greek temples burned without end, tended by priestesses who ensured it never died. To extinguish the fire was to break the bond between mortals and gods. Yet even in their worship, the Greeks sought understanding. They observed how air currents affected the flame, how the temple's structure sheltered it from wind, how heat rose naturally through the sanctuaries. Each temple became both a place of faith and a laboratory of physics. The most advanced examples of Greek heating were found in the palaces of Hellenistic kings. In these luxurious residences, small hypocaust-like systems began to appear beneath floors of marble and tile. Slaves stoked fires in adjoining rooms, allowing hot air to travel through channels beneath the floors. The warmth was subtle but consistent. Guests could walk barefoot across stone without feeling the cold, a luxury so profound it symbolized civilization itself. As time passed, the Greeks shared their knowledge with other cultures. Their architects and builders traveled across the Mediterranean, influencing design in Egypt, Asia Minor, and eventually Rome. They carried with them not just blueprints, but ideas about symmetry, proportion, and the controlled use of natural forces. Their experiments in air circulation, sunlight design, and underfloor heating would one day be perfected by the Romans, who would turn Greek logic into imperial engineering. As the flames of a Greek hearth flickered against a marble wall, a young boy might have sat nearby, watching how the light danced and the warmth faded with distance. Perhaps he wondered why some spots stayed warm while others cooled. Perhaps he imagined a way to spread the heat evenly, to make every corner of the room as gentle as the heart of the flame. That small curiosity, born in the mind of an ancient dreamer, would travel through centuries. By the time night fell over Athens, the city shimmered with firelight. Thousands of hearths burned within homes, temples, and bathhouses. Each flame was a reminder of how far humanity had come from the cave. The Greeks had taken warmth out of mystery and into reason. They had learned that comfort could be designed, that nature could be shaped by geometry, philosophy, and will. And though their fires would one day go cold, their ideas would not. Across the sea, another empire was rising, one that would take the Greek dream of warmth and magnify it 100-fold. In Rome, the architects of power were preparing to build something extraordinary. They would perfect the flow of heat, bend fire to their command, and create the world's first true central heating system. The story of warmth was about to become a story of empire. Rome rose with the morning sun, its marble temples glowing, its streets alive with the echo of sandals and the clatter of carts. Smoke drifted lazily from hundreds of chimneys and furnaces, a sign of the city's appetite for heat. From the humble bathhouse to the emperor's villa, warmth had become not just a comfort, but a symbol of civilization itself. And in that pursuit, the Romans achieved something extraordinary. They built the world's first true central heating system, the hypocaust. The story began with the Romans' obsession with baths. To bathe was not merely to wash, but to live. The thermae, massive public bathhouses, were the beating hearts of Roman cities. They were places of health, gossip, and politics, where senators discussed empire and commoners found brief equality in steam. But to keep these vast buildings warm was a monumental challenge. Fires alone could not fill rooms of marble and stone with steady heat. The Romans needed something more efficient, something ingenious. Roman engineers, inheriting Greek knowledge and adding their own flair for practicality, created the hypocaust, meaning fire underneath. It was a network of raised floors, hollow walls, and hidden furnaces. The system worked like this. A fire was lit in a furnace room called the praefurnium. Slaves tended the flames constantly, feeding them with wood and charcoal. The hot air and smoke from the fire passed through channels under the floors, supported by small brick pillars called pillae. These spaces allowed the air to flow evenly beneath the rooms, warming the stone floors above. The heat then rose gently through clay flues hidden in the walls, radiating warmth throughout the building before escaping through vents in the roof. For the first time in human history, heat was distributed mechanically, not just by proximity to fire. The hypocaust transformed the Roman way of life. In the great baths of Caracalla and Diocletian, one could walk barefoot across warm marble even in the dead of winter. The floors glowed softly with stored heat, and mist rose from the pools like breath from a living giant. The sensation was otherworldly, warmth that seemed to come from the very earth itself. Patrons marveled as the air shimmered with heat, and the baths filled with laughter, debate, and the echoes of music. It was luxury made physical, a triumph of Roman ingenuity. But the hypocaust was more than luxury. It was a statement of control. The Romans had mastered an invisible force. They could summon heat, channel it, command it. Their buildings became machines, powered by fire and designed with precision. The same technology spread to private villas, particularly in colder regions like Britannia and Gaul. Wealthy landowners built hypocausts beneath their dining rooms and bedrooms, enjoying steady warmth even as snow fell outside. To be warm in winter was to be civilized, to stand apart from the barbarians who still huddled around open fires.
The genius of the system lay in its simplicity and scalability. Engineers could adjust temperature by regulating the furnace or blocking certain vents. They learned that domed ceilings trapped heat and smooth marble reflected it evenly. Some hypocausts even featured multiple furnaces serving different rooms, creating a primitive zoning system. Others used bronze or lead pipes to carry hot air or steam into smaller spaces. Every design refinement made the experience more efficient, more comfortable, more Roman. Yet behind every warm bath and cozy chamber was labor. In the praefurnium, slaves toiled in blistering heat, feeding the flames day and night. Their faces were black with soot, their arms scarred from sparks. They rarely saw the splendor of the baths they heated. For them, warmth was not luxury, but servitude. This was the paradox of Roman progress: magnificent comfort built on human suffering. The empire's warmth came at a cost, one hidden beneath marble floors. In time, the hypocaust spread beyond Rome. Soldiers carried the design to the frontiers, building smaller versions in forts and outposts. Archaeologists have uncovered remains of these systems in England, Germany, and North Africa, proof that even at the edges of empire, Romans refused to surrender their warmth. Each site tells the same story: pillars of brick, soot-stained channels, and the silent testimony of innovation. Even today, the outlines of these structures reveal how advanced they were, thermal engineering 2 millennia ahead of its time. The hypocaust also reshaped architecture. Buildings were planned around furnaces and air channels. Walls grew thicker to accommodate flues, and floors were raised to create space for circulation. The design required precision. One mistake could choke the fire or trap smoke inside. Roman architects became masters of airflow, understanding intuitively what later generations would call thermodynamics. They had turned comfort into an art form. As the empire expanded, so did its appetite for heat. Villas in the cold north demanded larger furnaces and better insulation. In Italy, grander baths required more fuel and manpower. The forests surrounding Rome began to thin as wood was consumed in endless fires. Warmth had become an empire's addiction, a symbol of status, but also a burden of scale. The cost of maintaining comfort grew heavier with each new conquest. And yet, standing in a Roman bath at its height, surrounded by columns, steam, and echoing laughter, one could feel the triumph of the human mind. The hypocaust was more than an invention. It was a philosophy. It embodied Rome's belief that nature could be conquered, that even the cold could be bent to human will. Fire no longer ruled mankind, mankind ruled fire. At night, when the baths closed and the fires dimmed, the floors still radiated warmth. The walls glowed faintly, whispering with the memory of heat. In those moments, Rome seemed eternal, a civilization that had bottled the sun. The engineers who designed the hypocaust might not have known it, but they had created the ancestor of every modern heating system, from the radiators of Victorian England to the radiant floors of today's homes. The Romans did not invent the flame, nor the hearth, nor even the first heating channels, but they did something greater. They unified them. They turned warmth into infrastructure, heat into design. In doing so, they defined what it meant to live in comfort and what it meant to build an empire.
And somewhere, deep beneath a marble bathhouse, a slave stoked a furnace, unaware that the fire he fed would one day be remembered as the foundation of every warm home on earth. The furnace roared like a beast beneath the stone floor, its breath hot and steady. Sparks leapt upward each time the iron shovel struck the embers. The engineer, Marcus Vitruvius Aelius, stood above the preferentium, eyes narrowed, gauging the color of the flame. Yellow meant waste. Red meant perfection. Behind him, his young apprentice, Lucius, watched with awe and fear. This was the heart of Hadrian's newest villa, the emperor's private sanctuary in Tivoli, and Marcus had been tasked with a divine challenge: to build the most advanced hypocaust Rome had ever seen. "Keep the air channels clear," Marcus said without looking back. "If the smoke cannot move, neither can the heat." Lucius nodded and crouched beside the floor pillars. The pile, hundreds of small brick columns, stretched beneath the marble like a miniature city. Each one held up the floor above, leaving narrow tunnels between them where the hot air would flow. Lucius traced the pattern with his eyes, marveling at the precision. It wasn't chaos, it was harmony, crafted from mathematics and fire. Marcus moved toward the wall, where terracotta flues ran vertically, hidden behind smooth plaster. He touched them lightly. "Feel that?" he asked. Lucius pressed his hand against the wall. It was warm, alive. "The heat climbs," Marcus explained. "It breathes. The walls carry it upward. The bathers will never see it, but they will feel it everywhere." Outside, the construction site buzzed with energy. Slaves carried limestone blocks and clay tiles. Architects argued over measurements. Soldiers lounged in the shade, joking about how even the emperor needed help to keep warm. But Marcus paid no attention to the noise. To him, this wasn't just engineering, it was art. A symphony of air and stone, fire and flow. Each design decision had purpose. Each vent, each pillar, each curve of the chamber was part of the great unseen machinery that would transform cold stone into warmth. He had learned from the Greeks, but he built like a Roman, boldly, practically, beautifully. He knew that fire could be a dangerous ally. Too much heat cracked marble. Too little made the air stale. The hypocaust demanded balance. To design it was to speak the language of flame. "Lucius," Marcus said suddenly, "why do we build warmth into the ground?" The boy hesitated. "Because it rises?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Yes, but not just that. Because we must place power beneath comfort. The foundation must serve the living. Rome itself stands on the backs of those who feed its fire." The apprentice didn't fully understand, but he nodded. Later, as he carried tools to the furnace room, he glanced at the men working below. Their faces were streaked with soot. The fire's glow painted them in orange and shadow. They looked like spirits of Vulcan's forge. And he realized what Marcus meant. Every luxury came from labor hidden beneath the surface. Days passed, and the system took shape. The bathhouse's central hall gleamed with marble, its floors polished to mirror brightness. Above, mosaics of Neptune and sea nymphs shimmered under the lamplight. But the true masterpiece lay unseen. Beneath the mosaic floor ran a labyrinth of flues, channels, and vents, carefully calculated, meticulously aligned. When the fires were lit, heat would sweep under the rooms, curl through the walls, and emerge as gentle, even warmth. No smoke, no drafts, just comfort. When the emperor arrived for inspection, Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Hadrian was known for his love of architecture and his temper when things failed. The emperor entered the chamber with a small entourage, robes flowing, his expression unreadable. "So," he said, "this is the floor that breathes fire." Marcus bowed. "Yes, Caesar. The hypocaust is ready for testing." A signal was given. Slaves at the furnaces below began to work the bellows. Within minutes, the soft rumble of air filled the room. A faint warmth spread beneath their feet, subtle at first, then unmistakable. The emperor's sandals touched the marble. His eyebrows lifted. The floor felt alive, like walking upon sunlight. "Remarkable," Hadrian murmured. "The heat rises evenly. No smoke, no suffocation." Marcus exhaled, tension fading from his shoulders. "It will warm the baths as well, sire. The system carries heat through the walls and under the caldarium pools. Every room will breathe warmth as though the earth itself serves you." The emperor smiled, a rare expression of approval. "You have captured the sun and taught it obedience." The words filled Marcus with pride, though he knew the truth. The sun had not been captured, merely imitated. But to the emperor, illusion and mastery were one and the same. That night, when the workers had gone and the fires dimmed to embers, Marcus and Lucius remained. The chambers were silent except for the faint hiss of cooling stone. The engineer sat beside the furnace mouth, staring into the dying glow. He asked softly, "Do you hear it?" Lucius listened. The air moved faintly, whispering through the ducts. It sounded almost human, a slow, rhythmic breath. "It's alive," Marcus said. "The warmth moves, thinks, flows. It remembers where to go. We have given the building a soul."
Lucius said nothing. He watched his teacher's face lit by the last orange shimmer of the coals. There was reverence there, and exhaustion, and something deeper, wonder. The kind of awe one feels when standing at the edge of creation. When they finally left, the floor above still held its warmth. The marble glowed faintly under the moonlight, radiating the memory of fire. The emperor would sleep in comfort, unaware of the heat's long journey, from the furnace, through the ducts, across the stone, into the air he breathed. It was invisible perfection. For Marcus, the hypocaust was not just a triumph of engineering, it was a vision of the future. He dreamed of cities warmed without smoke, of homes where families no longer huddled by a single flame. He dreamed of harnessing warmth as freely as light. And though centuries would pass before such dreams returned, his work stood as proof that mankind could build warmth itself. As the villa settled into silence and the stars wheeled above Rome, the fire below whispered in its chamber, eternal and unseen. It was more than heat. It was history, alive beneath the floor. Morning in Rome began with the hiss of steam. From the heart of the Thermae, the great Roman baths, white clouds rose into the cool air, curling upward like spirits escaping from the earth. The scent of burning pine wood mingled with the sharp tang of hot water and oil. Inside, marble corridors echoed with the murmur of voices, the slap of sandals, and the quiet roar of furnaces buried below. The day was beginning at the baths of Caracalla, a palace of water and flame. Sunlight filtered through arched windows, scattering gold across the mist. Beneath the floors, the hypocaust roared to life, sending waves of heat through the caldarium, the great hot chamber where senators, soldiers, and slaves alike came to sweat the cold from their bones. Servants moved silently, pouring fragrant oils into bronze basins. Steam coiled around them as they walked barefoot across the warm stone. To an outsider, the baths might have seemed like magic, heat rising from invisible fires, water never cooling, marble floors as warm as living flesh. But below the surface, in shadowed corridors filled with smoke and heat, men labored endlessly to keep the miracle alive. In the Prefernium, a dozen slaves worked stripped to the waist, their skin glistening with sweat. They shoveled logs into wide furnaces, feeding the empire's appetite for luxury. The air shimmered with heat, thick enough to burn the lungs. Every spark that flew upward meant another moment of comfort for the citizens above. They had no view of marble or mosaics, only the endless, hungry mouths of the fires.
Above them, in the caldarium, warmth ruled. The room was vast and domed, its ceiling painted with gods of water and light. Pools shimmered beneath mosaics depicting dolphins and waves. Men reclined along the edges, their laughter echoing through the steam. Some discussed politics, grain prices, military campaigns, the emperor's decrees. Others spoke softly of philosophy, of the balance between body and soul. To the Romans, bathing was more than cleansing. It was communion. The hypocaust beneath them was alive. The air that flowed through its pillars was measured perfectly, neither too fierce nor too faint. The heat rose evenly through the stone, enveloping the room in a constant embrace. Warm water poured through copper pipes, heated by the same fires. Every drop, every breath, Every ripple in the pool was touched by flame. In one corner, an old man closed his eyes and let the warmth sink into his bones. "This," he murmured to a young attendant, "is the work of the gods, to make the earth breathe fire and yet not burn us." The attendant smiled, but said nothing. He knew, as many did, that it was not gods, but engineers who had given Rome its warmth. Further inside the complex, the tepidarium, the warm room, served as a passage between extremes. Here the air was softer, the light dimmer. Men lingered to let their bodies adjust before plunging into the frigidarium, the cold baths. The transition was ritual, symbolic of life itself, fire and water, heat and chill, purification through contrast. Every detail of the baths was a masterpiece of design. The floors rested on thousands of small brick pillars, carefully aligned to allow air to flow beneath. The walls were hollow, laced with terracotta tubes that carried the heat upward. Even the ceiling played a role, curving high to trap warm air before it escaped. The result was harmony, a perfect balance of comfort and grandeur. Outside, a queue of citizens waited at the entrance. Bathing was free, a gift from the emperors, a way to win loyalty as much as to grant luxury. Children laughed, merchants bargained, poets recited lines to pass the time. When the gates opened, they filed in like worshippers entering a temple. Inside, they were all equal. Status dissolved in steam. In the women's section, similar warmth enveloped the air. Conversations rose and fell like waves. The baths were places of gossip and courtship, of whispered news and secret meetings. The sound of dripping water mixed with laughter and the crackle of the furnaces below. At midday, the baths reached their peak. The floors glowed with heat, and the air shimmered like sunlight through water. The sound of splashing, laughter, and conversation filled the vaulted halls. Musicians played softly on flutes and lyres, their melodies echoing through the steam. The smell of olive oil, perfume, and smoke mingled in the air, a fragrance of civilization itself. In one corner of the caldarium, a small group gathered around a man sketching on a wax tablet. He was a young architect, describing a new design for a villa outside Rome. "Imagine," he said, tracing lines with his stylus, "a smaller hypocaust beneath every chamber, heat flowing not only to the baths but to bedrooms, dining halls, even libraries. A home that breathes warmth day and night."
The others nodded, intrigued. "And what of the cost?" one asked. He smiled. "Comfort has always been the empire's truest coin." They laughed, but his words lingered. The dream of warmth was spreading, moving from the public to the private, from luxury to necessity. Rome had not only mastered heat, it had made it desirable. As the afternoon waned, the baths began to cool. The fires still burned, but the flow of air shifted. The marble floors, once hot to the touch, now held only a gentle glow. Patrons wrapped themselves in towels, rubbed oil into their skin, and stepped into the fading light of evening. Outside, the air was crisp, the city alive with voices and color. Below, in the furnace rooms, the slaves still worked, their muscles aching, eyes stinging from smoke. They would feed the fires until long after the city slept. For them, warmth was a burden. For those above, it was bliss. Such was the order of Rome, comfort at the cost of unseen toil. As night fell over Rome,
the baths emptied, leaving only echoes. Steam drifted lazily across the silent halls. The marble floors still radiated the last of the day's heat, soft and steady. It was a warmth that seemed eternal, an illusion of immortality. If one stood alone in the caldarium after dark, one could hear the faint hum of the hypocaust beneath, the quiet exhalation of the building itself. It was as though the structure breathed, alive with memory, whispering of the fires that never ceased. Rome's greatness lay not only in conquest or wealth, but in mastery of the unseen. The hypocaust had turned stone into a living thing, and warmth into power. To stand within its heat was to feel the pulse of empire itself, a heartbeat of fire that would echo through history long after the marble had turned to dust. Night settled over Rome like a velvet shroud, with streets cooling as the last embers in countless hearths flickered low. In the city's wealthy districts, the Palatine Hill, the Aventine villas, the air inside still glowed with warmth. Beneath marble floors and painted walls, the hypocausts hummed softly, breathing heat into rooms scented with wine and incense. But in the alleyways below, among the tenements of the poor, the cold bit deep. Families huddled under thin blankets, their only fire a candle that barely kept the dark at bay. Warmth had become a line drawn through society, as sharp as any sword. The rich no longer fought against winter, they conquered it. The poor still trembled in its grasp. Rome's mastery of heat, once a symbol of progress, had become a mirror reflecting inequality. In a villa overlooking the Tiber, a senator reclined in his dining hall. The marble beneath him was warm, radiating comfort through the soles of his sandals. Servants poured mulled wine, the sweet scent filling the air. "The gods have blessed Rome," he said to his guests. "Even the earth gives us warmth now." Laughter followed. None of them thought about the men tending the furnaces below, barefoot, soot-streaked, half-starved. Their labor fed this comfort, but their names would never be spoken.
Beneath the villa, in the furnace rooms, the truth was very different. The Pryfernium glowed red, the air thick with heat and smoke. Slaves shoveled wood into the fire, sweat dripping onto the stone floor. Their world was a constant roar of flame and labor. The heat that brought pleasure above brought suffering below. For every warm floor in Rome, there was a man burned by the same fire. Lucius, a young furnace worker, paused to wipe his brow. His master's voice echoed from above, demanding more heat for the baths. He opened the furnace door and felt the air rush out, hot enough to sear skin. For a moment, he thought of the people walking on the warm marble floors above, their laughter muffled by stone. He wondered if they ever felt the lives burning beneath their feet. Across the city, in the insulae, the tall, crowded tenement buildings, there were no hypocausts. The poor burned scraps of wood or dried dung in clay braziers. The smoke filled the rooms, blackening ceilings and lungs alike. Children coughed in the night, while mothers wrapped them in torn cloth for warmth. A small ember could bring tragedy. Whole blocks had burned because of a single overturned fire pot. The same fire that gave comfort to the rich often killed the poor. The divide was not just physical, it was symbolic. Warmth meant power, the ability to control heat, to summon it, store it, and live within it became a sign of dominance. The hypocaust was more than a machine. It was a statement of class.
It declared that some lives were meant for comfort and others for endurance. The emperor's own palaces displayed this divide in grand fashion. Hadrian's villa, Nero's golden house, and later the baths of Diocletian, all were marvels of engineering and excess. The hypocausts there were vast networks of chambers, capable of heating multiple buildings at once. Some even featured adjustable vents and valves, allowing precise control over temperature. It was an empire of warmth, sustained by endless wood, labor, and ingenuity. But it was also an empire of hierarchy. In the countryside, wealthy estates mimicked the same systems. Their owners bragged of heated rooms, warm dining halls, and even greenhouses where exotic plants grew through winter. Meanwhile, the farmers who worked their lands slept in huts that froze at night. For them, the only heat came from the animals they kept indoors for survival. They watched the glow of their masters' villas on the horizon and dreamed of warmth they would never touch. Philosophers noticed this contrast. Seneca wrote of the baths and villas, calling them the symbols of softness, warning that luxury made men weak. He said the same fire that hardens steel can also melt the spirit. Yet even he bathed in warmth, unable to escape the temptation of comfort. The poor did not resent the invention itself. They admired it. To them, the hypocaust was a kind of miracle. Children whispered about houses with hot floors as if they were enchanted by Vulcan himself. It was proof that the world could be changed by human hands, even if it was not changed for them.
In the grand baths, warmth created a strange illusion of equality. Rich and poor alike entered the steam together, stripped of clothing and status. But once they stepped outside, the divide returned. The wealthy went home to their warm villas. The poor returned to their freezing rooms. For a few hours, they had shared the same air. Then the illusion melted away. As winter deepened, the city devoured wood at an astonishing rate. Carts of logs arrived from distant forests, driven by men whose faces were hidden beneath soot and frost. Rome's appetite for heat was endless. Every bath, every villa, every palace demanded its share. The empire's forests shrank, and the hills grew bare. Even nature paid a price for comfort. And yet, for all its injustice, the hypocaust changed the world. It proved that warmth could be engineered, that the environment could be shaped by human will. The same knowledge that served the elite would, in time, serve all. The slaves tending the furnaces could not know that the principle of their labor, heat controlled, distributed, perfected, would one day return in new forms: chimneys, boilers, radiators, and pipes. One evening, Lucius stood outside his master's villa, watching the smoke rise from the flues. The air was cold, his hands numb. Above, light shone through marble windows, warm and golden. He thought of the rooms he had heated but never entered. The fire he tended had made others comfortable, but not him. Still, he felt a strange pride. Somewhere inside, he knew he was part of something greater, a system of warmth that would outlive both master and slave. As Rome slept, the fires continued to burn. Beneath the villas and baths, the furnaces glowed in the dark, unseen and eternal. The warmth crept through the walls, up the pillars, across the stone floors, wrapping the empire in its invisible hand. The city was alive with two worlds, one bathed in comfort, the other buried in smoke, both bound by the same fire.
It was a fragile balance, sustained by ambition and ash, and when the empire began to falter, when the fires dimmed and the hands that fed them stilled, that warmth would vanish. The marble floors would turn cold again. The silence of extinction would fall over the hypocausts, and Rome's breath, the breath of heat, would fade into the dust of memory. For now, though, the empire still glowed. In its warmth was beauty, cruelty, and genius, the eternal paradox of civilization. The last fires of Rome burned low. Smoke curled through the cracks of broken marble, rising from the ruins of once mighty villas and bathhouses that had stood as symbols of civilization's triumph over nature. The air, once filled with the hum of life and warmth, grew still. The Pryfernium, those deep-bellied furnaces that had roared with heat for centuries, stood cold and dark. Ashes gathered where slaves had shoveled coal. The empire that had commanded the sun to serve its comfort now shivered in silence. It happened slowly at first, a skipped repair, a furnace untended, a marble tile cracked and left unmended. The engineers who once understood the delicate balance of air and heat were gone, lost to war, plague, and the slow unraveling of empire. The roads that carried timber from distant forests were no longer safe. The supply lines broke. Without fuel, the hypocausts died.
And when the warmth left the homes and baths, it felt as if the soul of Rome had followed it into the dark. The great thermae, the baths of Caracalla, Diocletian, and Titus, stood like ghosts of a warmer age. Their domes still reached for the heavens, but inside, only the wind moved. The mosaics were covered in dust. The pools had turned to stone basins filled with rainwater and debris. The once gentle hum of circulating heat was replaced by the echo of ravens. People said you could still feel a faint warmth in the walls at sunset, the lingering breath of fires long dead. But it was only memory. In the villas of the aristocracy, the story was the same. When the armies withdrew and the invaders came, servants fled, and no one remained to tend the furnaces. Marble floors cracked from frost, their once glowing patterns now cold to the touch. The rich fled to the countryside, seeking safety over luxury. They left behind the brilliance of the hypocaust, unable to rebuild it. The knowledge was too specialized, too fragile, too dependent on the vast machinery of empire, and so it was forgotten. The world grew colder, not only in temperature but in spirit. The fall of Rome was not just the collapse of armies and borders, but of warmth itself. Europe entered the long shadow of the Middle Ages, where castles were built thick and narrow, their rooms warmed only by open fires. Smoke filled the air again. Walls blackened, ceilings wept soot. The controlled heat of the Romans became a lost art. Travelers who stumbled upon the ruins of old Roman baths in later centuries were mystified. They found strange pillars beneath the floors, hollow tubes in the walls, and scorched stone chambers deep underground. Some thought they were prisons or tombs. Others said they were dwellings for demons. None guessed that these ruins had once carried invisible rivers of fire through marble halls. The knowledge had turned to myth. In a small village near the old Roman road to Gaul, an old man sat by his hearth and told his grandson stories of a time when the earth itself gave warmth. "They say," he whispered, "that under the great stones of the south there are tunnels where fire used to flow like wind. The people there never knew cold. Their walls glowed and their floors breathed heat. But they grew proud.
They forgot the gods who gave them fire, and so the gods took it back. The boy's eyes widened as he looked into the flickering flames. To him, it was magic. To his grandfather, it was loss. As the centuries passed, ruins were scavenged for stone. The hypocaust chambers were filled with dirt, their purpose erased. But beneath the soil, the architecture of warmth remained. Brick pillars stood in silence, bearing the weight of time. Clay flues still clung to walls, blackened by the ghosts of fire. The bones of the system endured, waiting for rediscovery.
In the cold winters that followed Rome's fall, life grew smaller, harder. People crowded around single hearths for warmth. Entire families slept beside the fire, their shadows dancing on the walls. The glow of the flame became the center of existence once more, just as it had been in the caves of prehistory. Civilization had come full circle. And yet, even in the darkest times, whispers of the old warmth persisted. Monks in distant monasteries copied fragments of Roman writings, treatises by Vitruvius and Pliny that spoke of architecture, air, and heat. They did not fully understand what they transcribed, but the knowledge survived in ink, if not in practice. Hidden within those scrolls were the blueprints for rebirth. Occasionally, a traveler or scholar would marvel at the ruins of a Roman bath and wonder at its perfection. How did they warm such vast halls, they would ask. No one could answer. The art of distributed heat, of turning fire into comfort, was a secret buried under centuries of ash and ignorance. The silence of the hypocaust was the silence of lost civilization. And yet, even in the darkest times, a quiet truth remained. Fire could be reborn. The principles that had once tamed heat were eternal, waiting for curious minds to rediscover them. But for now, the world shivered. In the heart of a crumbling villa, a single hypocaust still stood half intact. The floor above had collapsed, revealing the forest of pillars below. At sunset, light filtered through the ruins, glinting off blackened bricks. For a moment, it looked as if the old warmth had returned, a faint shimmer of gold against the cold stone. Then the light faded, and the chill returned, deep and endless. The empire that had mastered fire was gone, but its ashes held the promise of warmth yet to come. For every invention that dies in darkness, there is always someone, somewhere, ready to relight the flame. The long winter of humanity had begun. The wind howled through the cracks of the stone tower, rattling wooden shutters and carrying with it the deep chill of a medieval winter. Inside, a great fire blazed in the center of the hall, its smoke swirling upward before vanishing into the black mouth of a crude chimney. Around the flames, men and women huddled close, their faces half lit, half lost in shadow. The glow was uneven, scorching near the fire, freezing just steps away. Beyond the circle of light, the vast hall was an ocean of cold. This was life in medieval Europe, centuries after the fall of Rome. The marvels of the hypocaust were long forgotten. In their place rose a simpler, harsher relationship with fire, one born not of mastery, but survival. Castles were built thick and high, designed for defense, not comfort. The stone walls that protected kings from their enemies offered little protection from the cold. The hearth became the center of existence once more. It was a return to beginnings, a single, hungry flame struggling to warm the void. In the castles of nobles, immense fireplaces were carved directly into the walls, wide enough to stand inside. They devoured logs by the cartload, sending waves of heat and plumes of smoke through the halls. Servants moved constantly to feed the flames, dragging fresh wood from the frozen courtyards outside. The fire was both gift and tyrant. Stand too close and the sparks burned your skin. Stand too far and frost bit your fingers. Soot coated every surface, and the air thickened with the smell of ash. Even kings sneezed and coughed through the winter months. The art of heating had regressed by centuries, but humanity endured. In villages, peasants built cottages of wood and straw, their walls thin and drafty. A small hearth in the center served as kitchen, heater, and gathering place. Smoke filled the air, stinging eyes and lungs, escaping only through a hole in the roof. Children slept near the fire, wrapped in old cloth and animal hides. When the flames died in the night, frost crept across the walls, and families shivered awake to rekindle the embers. Still, the fire was sacred. It was life itself. Every home guarded it as carefully as treasure. A single burning log could mean survival through the night. Travelers often carried glowing coals in clay pots when they moved between villages. The memory of Rome's clean, invisible heat had vanished, but the reverence for warmth remained. Over time, builders began to make small improvements. Chimneys became more common, guiding smoke upward instead of into rooms. Iron grates were invented to hold wood above the hearth, allowing air to flow and fires to burn more efficiently. Some lords began to experiment with heating adjacent chambers by placing their fireplaces against shared walls. A few even built hollow ducts behind the hearthstones to let warm air drift into nearby rooms, a faint, distant echo of the hypocaust. Monasteries, those islands of knowledge in the medieval dark, preserved what little remained of Roman wisdom. Monks studying ancient texts sometimes stumbled upon descriptions of old heating systems. Though they couldn't recreate them, the ideas lingered in their minds. In the scriptoriums, where candles flickered and parchment crackled, warmth was a rare luxury. Scribes wore gloves with the fingertips cut off, shivering as they copied manuscripts that spoke of a warmer world long lost. In the grandest cathedrals, builders began to rediscover the power of design. They aligned windows to catch the low winter sun, using light to bring subtle heat into vast, echoing spaces. The masons who built these churches were descendants of Rome's engineers in spirit, if not in knowledge. Without realizing it, they were relearning the art of shaping warmth through structure. For the common people, winter became a season of endurance. Frost etched its patterns on the inside of walls. Water froze in jugs, bread turned to stone, and breath lingered in the air like mist. Warmth was fleeting, a daily battle. Villagers gathered in communal halls to share fires, stories, and strength. The hearth was more than heat, it was hope. In the courts of Europe, luxury began to creep back into life. Lords demanded larger fires, finer chimneys, and warmer chambers. They hung thick tapestries on the walls to trap heat and soften the echo of stone. Rugs were laid on cold floors, and heavy drapes covered the windows. These comforts were crude compared to Rome's perfection, but they marked the slow return of human imagination. The symbolism of warmth grew powerful again. Fire became not just a necessity, but a metaphor for divine light, passion, and life. Kings and priests alike spoke of the inner flame of the soul. Churches kept eternal candles burning on their altars, echoes of the sacred fires once tended in Roman temples. Even in ignorance, the memory of controlled heat survived in spirit. One winter night in a northern castle, a young apprentice to a mason stood gazing at the roaring fire. The light flickered across the stone walls, and he traced the patterns of the smoke as it curled upward into the chimney. What if, he wondered aloud, the fire could be made to travel? What if its warmth could move through the walls as wind through trees? His master laughed, dismissing the boy's fancy. But the idea lingered, an ember of curiosity in the long, cold centuries. Outside, snow blanketed the ruins of old Roman roads. Beneath them, buried deep in the earth, still lay the forgotten bricks of hypocausts, silent and waiting. The world had grown cold again, but the potential for warmth had not died. It had only slept. By the end of the Middle Ages, whispers of rediscovery began to stir. Merchants from Italy and scholars from Byzantium returned with tales of ancient marvels, structures that once breathed heat, where people walked barefoot in winter. The seeds of Renaissance curiosity had been planted, and soon humanity would turn its eyes once more to the past. But in this age, the flame remained humble, fragile, human. Every fire was fed by hands. Every spark was a fight against the cold. And yet in every home, from peasant hut to royal hall, the same dream burned quietly, that one day warmth would fill the world again. The dark centuries would pass and the world would remember. The fire would evolve once more into a force of creation rather than mere survival. But for now, the night was long, and the hearth, small though it was enough to keep hope alive. The winds swept across the desert, carrying with it the scent of dust, spices, and faraway cities. Beneath the blazing sun, domes of white stone and towers of gold rose above the horizon. This was the world that had inherited the ashes of Rome, not through conquest, but through knowledge. While Europe shivered in darkness, the Islamic world burned brightly with light, reason, and discovery.
In Baghdad, Cordoba, Damascus, and Cairo, scholars gathered under the glow of oil lamps, surrounded by scrolls and instruments. They were guardians of a flame that had nearly gone out, the flame of learning. The ancient texts of Greece and Rome, once abandoned to ruin, were translated into Arabic, studied and expanded upon, and among those texts were the forgotten secrets of warmth. The writings of Vitruvius, the musings of Aristotle, the geometry of light and air. They called their pursuit ilm, knowledge. To them, understanding nature was an act of devotion. Fire, water, air, and earth were not just elements, but divine expressions of balance. The scholars of the Islamic Golden Age saw warmth not as a luxury, but as part of the harmony of creation. They studied it, measured it, and began to rebuild what the West had forgotten. In Baghdad, during the reign of Caliph Harun al-Rashid, the great house of wisdom stood as a beacon of science. Within its walls, architects and engineers debated how to control the desert heat and the chill of night. They studied Roman ruins, Greek manuscripts, and Persian methods. They learned how heat moved, how air flowed, how buildings breathed. From these studies emerged a new understanding of architecture, one that used both the sun and the earth as tools. In the homes of scholars and nobles, warmth became an art of design. Builders used thick walls of mud brick and stone to trap the day's heat and release it slowly through the night. Courtyards were designed with geometric precision to catch sunlight in winter and shade in summer. Water channels, called qanats,
ran beneath the floors, carrying cool air from underground during the day, while heat stored in the walls kept homes comfortable at night. It was a living balance, a dance between warmth and coolness that made life in the desert not only possible, but elegant. In Persia, engineers refined the use of the badgir, the wind tower. These tall, elegant structures caught the breeze high above and guided it downward into homes and halls. The air, cooled by passing over water or shaded stone, created a natural form of air conditioning. But the principle could also be reversed. By closing the vents and trapping the sun's heat, the same towers could help retain warmth during cold nights. It was ancient climate control, sophisticated and sustainable, centuries ahead of its time. In the meantime, in the palaces of Andalusia, the architects of Al-Andalus blended science and beauty into perfect harmony. The Alhambra of Granada, with its shimmering courtyards and arched corridors, was not only a marvel of art, but of environmental design. Its walls absorbed heat by day and released it gently by night. Its pools and fountains cooled the air while maintaining moisture in the dry climate. Warmth and coolness flowed like poetry through its chambers. Scholars such as Al-Kindi, Al-Hazan, Ibn al-Haytham, and Al-Tusi explored the nature of light and heat in their writings. They understood reflection, radiation, and the behavior of air long before Europe rediscovered these principles. Al-Kindi described how heat moved through materials, noting that black surfaces absorbed warmth faster than white, a truth that would later become the foundation of modern thermodynamics. They saw warmth not merely as a human need, but as a phenomenon to be understood, measured, and harnessed.
The hospitals, or bimaristans, of Damascus and Baghdad were built with this knowledge in mind. Their walls were lined with stone that held warmth through the cold months. Courtyards were oriented to catch sunlight, while ventilation shafts circulated air. Patients recovered not in damp, smoky chambers as in Europe, but in clean, temperate spaces, designed with both science and compassion. Even in the bathhouses of the Islamic world, the spirit of Rome lived on. The hammam, descendant of the Roman thermae, retained the idea of underfloor heating. Beneath the tiled floors of these baths, furnaces called Bait al-Nar, houses of fire, heated air that flowed through flues and chambers. Steam filled the air as bathers moved from warm to hot rooms, cleansing both body and spirit. These baths were social centers, much like those of ancient Rome, but infused with new philosophy, that cleanliness and balance were next to holiness. Across the Mediterranean, Europe slept in cold castles, while in the East, warmth had been reinvented, not through opulence, but through wisdom. The builders of the Islamic world looked at nature and saw lessons rather than obstacles. They did not fight the sun or the wind, they befriended them. Their homes, mosques, and palaces became living organisms, structures that breathed, absorbed, and radiated warmth in perfect balance with their surroundings. The exchange of knowledge traveled along the Silk Road and across the sea. Merchants carried spices, silks, and stories. Among those stories were whispers of ancient technologies, of Roman fires that warmed stone floors and Persian towers that caught the wind. Pilgrims, scholars, and travelers carried these tales into Europe. Slowly, curiosity began to stir once more. In the libraries of Toledo, translators worked tirelessly to turn Arabic manuscripts into Latin. Among them was a young scholar named Gerard of Cremona, who spent his life translating hundreds of texts. Through his work, the wisdom of the East re-entered the West. The writings of Aristotle, Galen, and Vitruvius returned to European scholars, but this time, accompanied by commentaries from their Arabic interpreters. Knowledge had made a full circle, carried like a flame from one civilization to another, kept alive through the darkest of winters. In this era, warmth was more than physical, it was intellectual. The Islamic Golden Age had preserved the warmth of thought, of curiosity, of invention. Where Europe had lost the hypocaust, the East had kept alive its spirit, the idea that heat could be understood, guided, and shaped by human hands. As centuries turned and empires rose and fell, that knowledge would flow back into Europe like the morning sun over a long night. The Renaissance was coming, and with it, a new birth of warmth, born from the wisdom the world refused to let die. The old flame had crossed deserts, oceans, and languages. It had survived conquest and collapse, and now it was ready to ignite the world again.
The dawn of the Renaissance was like the relighting of a great fire. Across Europe, the frost of ignorance began to melt. Artists, architects, and scholars looked once more to the ancient world, to Greece, to Rome, and to the East, and found there the embers of forgotten knowledge still glowing. Among those embers was a question as old as civilization itself. How do we master warmth? After centuries of smoke-filled halls and shivering nights, Europe was ready to remember. The rediscovery of Vitruvius's De Architectura, a Roman text preserved through Arabic scholars, became a revelation. Architects pored over its words, marveling at the detailed descriptions of hypocausts and the principles of air and heat. For the first time in 1,000 years, builders began to think not just of walls and roofs, but of comfort. Cities like Florence, Venice, and Nuremberg pulsed with new energy. Science, art, and engineering were no longer separate pursuits. They were threads of the same tapestry. The architects of the Renaissance saw buildings not just as shelters, but as living systems, structures that should breathe, circulate air, and cradle warmth with elegance. The human body was their model, and warmth was its lifeblood. In Florence, under the Medici, the revival of Roman genius found a patron. Grand villas rose in the Tuscan hills, their symmetry and beauty echoing the perfection of antiquity. Yet hidden beneath their marble floors and frescoed ceilings were quiet innovations. Fireplaces became art. Carved from stone and adorned with reliefs, they replaced the crude medieval hearths that had filled rooms with smoke. The chimneys above them grew taller, drawing air more efficiently, while new flues were added to carry heat deeper into the walls. Engineers experimented with radiant warmth. In some villas, hollow spaces were built behind walls, allowing warm air from the kitchen or furnace to circulate. It was a primitive revival of the hypocaust, simpler, smaller, but unmistakably inspired by it. Guests marveled that rooms could be heated without the choking smoke that had once been unavoidable. In Germany and in the colder lands of the north, another revolution was kindling. Craftsmen began to build Kachelofens, tiled stoves that combined the Roman principle of radiant heat with medieval practicality. These stoves were made of ceramic tiles that absorbed the heat of a small fire and released it slowly for hours. A single load of wood could keep a room warm through the night. The tiles were beautifully painted, turning heating into art. In castles, monasteries, and later in ordinary homes, the Kachelofen became the centerpiece of winter life. It was clean, efficient, and silent, a distant cousin to the Roman furnace reborn in a colder age.
Scholars and natural philosophers began to study heat not just as a sensation, but as a science. Leonardo da Vinci sketched designs for efficient fireplaces and airflow systems, analyzing how smoke moved and how heat could be captured. He wrote that heat is the movement of the spirit of fire, describing in poetic terms what later generations would call energy transfer. His notebooks contained drawings of chimneys with air vents and curved hoods,
innovations centuries ahead of their time. In Venice, where the damp cold seeped through every wall, architects learned to channel heat upward through brick ducts, using the geometry of their palaces to distribute warmth evenly. They placed fireplaces on opposite sides of shared walls so that a single chimney could serve 2 rooms. In these small acts of efficiency lay the rebirth of intelligent design, the rediscovery of how warmth could be made to flow, not just burn. The Renaissance also revived the Roman obsession with bathing. Wealthy patrons built private baths inspired by the thermae of old, with hot and cold chambers, pools, and underfloor fires. The designs of these baths, like those in the palaces of Mantua and Urbino, echoed the past while using the technology of the present. They were not as grand as Caracala's halls, but they carried the same spirit, the belief that comfort and cleanliness were marks of civilization. As trade expanded and knowledge flowed across borders, heating systems evolved. The Dutch perfected the enclosed fireplace, lining it with tiles that reflected heat into the room. The English, ever practical, developed coal grates that burned longer and cleaner than wood. In France, builders created ornate chimney pieces that became both heating tools and works of art, framing fire with marble and sculpture. The home itself began to change. Rooms were smaller, ceilings lower, windows glazed. These designs held warmth more effectively than the cavernous stone halls of the Middle Ages. The fire, once a communal center, now became personal. It moved from the great hall to the private chamber. Warmth became intimacy. But beyond luxury and comfort, something deeper was stirring. A scientific curiosity that sought to understand warmth as more than a craft. The philosophers of the Renaissance saw in fire the key to nature's mysteries. Alchemists studied it as a force of transformation, physicists as a principle of motion. They measured, observed, and began to glimpse the laws that governed heat itself. In a study in Padua, a young Galileo Galilei watched how air expanded when heated, sketching notes that would one day lead to thermometers. In Oxford, Robert Boyle experimented with air pressure, hinting at the invisible dance between heat and gas. The study of fire had become the study of energy, though no one yet knew its name. Yet even as science grew, art did not yield its place. Painters like Raphael and Michelangelo filled their frescoes with the golden glow of warmth, the light of the sun, the reflection of fire, the metaphor of rebirth. Warmth became a symbol of divine inspiration, the fire of the human soul rekindled after centuries of cold. By the late Renaissance, Europe was ready for a new age of invention. The rediscovered past had lit the path forward. The tiled stove, the refined chimney, the radiant wall, all were stepping stones toward the machines that would soon reshape the world. In the quiet halls of Florence, where sunlight streamed through the arches and flickered over the hearth, a philosopher might have whispered, "We have found the warmth of the ancients again." And perhaps, without knowing it, he would have spoken the truth of the ages, that warmth is not just a matter of fire, but of spirit, of memory, of the endless human desire to bring light into the dark.
The Renaissance had relit the flame. The world was warm once more, but soon that warmth would be forged into iron, steam, and revolution. The next fire would not burn in hearths or beneath floors. It would burn in the hearts of machines. Smoke rose from the chimneys of London, thick and endless, blotting out the sky in a haze of gray. The air smelled of coal and progress. It was the dawn of a new age, the Industrial Revolution, when fire no longer flickered quietly in hearths or beneath marble floors. It thundered inside furnaces, boiled water into steam, and drove the engines of empire. Humanity had rediscovered warmth, but this time it was not comfort they sought. It was power. The world of the 18th and 19th centuries was built upon the mastery of heat. The same principles that had once warmed Roman baths now fueled the factories of Birmingham, Manchester, and Glasgow. Fire, that ancient ally, had been transformed into an industrial force. Iron melted, steam expanded, pistons moved, and with every motion, civilization advanced. Yet amid the noise of engines and the glow of molten metal, another transformation was quietly taking place, the rebirth of central heating. In the great cities of Europe, the hearth was no longer enough. Stone houses trapped cold, and open fires wasted more heat than they gave. As populations grew and winters bit harder against the walls of progress, engineers and inventors turned their attention to the problem of warmth once again. They would rediscover, refine, and reinvent what Rome had once achieved: the ability to heat entire buildings from a single source. The story began with steam. In 1777, a brilliant Scottish engineer named James Watt perfected the steam engine, unlocking the potential of heated water as a source of motion. But another Scotsman, William Strutt, saw in it something different. Around the turn of the 19th century, Strutt designed a new type of heating system for a hospital in Derby. Instead of an open fire, he used a furnace to heat air, which was then distributed through brick ducts and metal grates across multiple rooms. It was warm, clean, and controlled, a mechanical echo of the Roman hypocast. From there, innovation spread quickly. In 1805, a French engineer named Jean-Simon Bonnemine introduced a system that used hot water circulating through iron pipes to heat buildings evenly. The technology fascinated Europe's architects and inventors. For the first time since antiquity, heat could travel through walls, beneath floors, and into distant rooms without smoke or flame. The dream of the hypocast had returned, reborn in iron and steam.
Factories adopted the technology first. Workers who once froze at their looms now labored in warmth, though the air was thick with soot. Soon, mansions and government buildings followed. The new systems were symbols of modernity, as much as the steam engines that powered trains and ships. To have central heating was to live in the future.
In America, the idea crossed the Atlantic with the Industrial Age. Early inventors like Stephen Gould and Joseph Nason began to experiment with steam-based home heating systems. By the mid-19th century, New York brownstones and Boston townhouses were being fitted with radiators, iron sculptures that hissed and pulsed with life. The gentle warmth they emitted transformed urban living. Fire no longer burned in every room, it pulsed invisibly through pipes. The architecture of warmth evolved again. Homes no longer needed massive chimneys or central hearths. The heart of the home shifted from the fireplace to the boiler room. In place of flickering flame came the steady hum of machinery. The world had learned to circulate heat as it once circulated blood. But the new warmth carried both promise and peril. The Industrial Revolution brought progress, but also pollution. The same coal that powered locomotives and factories filled the skies with soot. Cities glowed orange at night, not from the hearths of homes, but from the furnaces of industry. People coughed as they walked through fog that tasted of ash. Warmth had become abundant, but it was no longer clean. In drawing rooms and universities, thinkers debated the future of heat. Some, like Count Rumford, Benjamin Thompson, studied how to make fireplaces more efficient, designing narrow chimneys and angled grates that reflected warmth into the room instead of letting it escape. Others dreamed of replacing fire altogether. Scientists began to see heat not as an element or spirit, but as energy, something that could be measured, transferred, and stored. By the mid-19th century, hot water systems had spread across Europe. Engineers like Angier March Perkins perfected the pressurized water radiator capable of heating large buildings safely and efficiently. The first schools, hospitals, and libraries that installed such systems became showcases of modern comfort. For the first time, warmth was a right, not a privilege. Still, the old romance of fire lingered. Families gathered around stoves even when their homes were fully heated. The flicker of flame remained a symbol of humanity itself, a connection to ancestors who had huddled in caves and temples. Yet outside, the landscape had changed forever. The countryside was dotted with blackened chimneys, and rivers ran warm from factory runoff. Humanity had conquered the cold, but at a cost. By the late 1800s, warmth had entered its mechanical age. Boilers replaced hearths. Radiators replaced the glow of firelight. Heat became invisible, reliable, industrial. The world no longer depended on the flickering will of flame. It depended on the turning of valves, the hiss of pipes, and the rhythm of progress. And yet, in that hum of machines, there was still something ancient, a whisper from Rome, from Greece, from the deserts of Persia. The principles had not changed, only the tools had. Beneath the iron and steam, the same dream burned: to live in comfort, to master nature, to carry warmth wherever humanity went. One evening in London, as the fog thickened over the Thames, a man stood by his window, watching the street lamps glow through the haze. His room was warm, though he had not lit a fire. The air hissed softly from the radiator beside him. He smiled, not knowing that he was standing inside history, a living descendant of the first Roman who had ever walked barefoot across a heated floor.
The fire that had once been tended by slaves now ran through pipes and engines, powered by steam and science. Humanity had finally done what the Romans dreamed of. They had made warmth endless. But fire, like ambition, never rests. The next revolution was already brewing: electricity, gas, and eventually the birth of the modern home. The warmth of the future would not roar in furnaces or flow through boilers. It would hum quietly in the walls, controlled by invisible hands. The age of steam was ending, but the age of comfort had only just begun. The evening sky glowed in hues of amber and violet as the hum of a modern city pulsed beneath it. Behind glass towers and quiet homes, warmth moved silently through copper pipes, radiant coils, and invisible currents of air. No flames danced in hearths. No smoke curled into the sky. Yet every room was alive with the same ancient comfort that had once flickered in a Roman villa or a Neolithic cave. Humanity had come full circle. The long story of fire, of invention, loss, rediscovery, and mastery had led here to the age of invisible heat. It began as it always did, with a need to survive. But over the 19th century was an age of iron and ambition, but the 20th would become an age of comfort.
The smoke that had once darkened city skies began to thin, and the orange glow of coal fires gave way to something quieter, cleaner, and far more personal. Humanity was learning not only how to make heat, but how to control it. In the final decades of the 1800s, homes and cities pulsed with steam. Boilers roared in basements, radiators clanged in hallways, and warmth flowed through iron arteries into every corner of the industrial world. But there was a problem. Heat, though abundant, was stubborn. It surged too high, vanished too quickly, and refused to obey its makers. The world had power, but not precision. The next revolution would not come from fire. It would come from control. The key was a simple idea. The temperature could be measured, regulated, and maintained. In 1883, Warren Johnson, a quiet schoolteacher from Wisconsin, invented the first mechanical thermostat. It was a small device, a metal coil and mercury switch, but its impact was vast. For the first time, buildings could sense their own warmth and respond to it. The age of automatic heat had begun. Factories soon adopted thermostats to stabilize temperatures for production, but it was in homes that the technology truly changed life. Radiators no longer hissed unchecked. Rooms remained steady through the night. People woke to the same warmth they had felt before sleep, an invisible miracle that would have seemed like magic to their ancestors. In the early 1900s, new materials transformed heating systems again. Cast iron gave way to steel, and later to copper and aluminum, metals that carried heat faster and cleaner. Engineers refined boilers to burn fuel more efficiently. Gas replaced coal. Electricity replaced matches. And with each change, fire became less visible and more obedient.
By the 1920s, architects were reimagining warmth as part of design itself. Modernist homes used radiant floors, pipes hidden beneath polished concrete or tile, to create an even, gentle heat that rose through the room like sunlight. It was the closest humanity had come to the Roman hypocast in nearly 2 millennia, reborn with modern materials. The principle was the same: a warm floor, a comfortable body, and a quiet, unseen engine beneath. The great public buildings of the era, libraries, theaters, train stations, were showcases of engineering elegance. Massive boilers fed heat through ducts and vents, while fans circulated air evenly across vast halls. Some of these systems could heat entire city blocks, a concept the Romans could only have dreamed of. In places like New York and Chicago, networks of underground steam pipes delivered warmth directly to buildings, a modern urban version of the hypocast that stretched for miles. By mid-century, central heating had become a symbol of modern life. A thermostat on the wall was as ordinary as a clock, a quiet promise that the cold would never return uninvited. Children in London, New York, and Moscow alike grew up in homes where warmth flowed at the turn of a dial. The long human struggle against winter had finally ended in victory. Yet with comfort came complexity. The warmth that once required wood and sweat now depended on vast networks of gas lines, electric grids, and power stations. Fire was no longer personal. It was industrialized, hidden behind walls and wires. The ancient bond between flame and human was fading. Still, something of that bond remained, an unspoken gratitude for the invisible heat that made modern life possible. After the Second World War, the pace of innovation quickened. Engineers developed forced air systems that used fans to distribute heat evenly through ducts. Radiant panels were embedded in ceilings and walls. Oil furnaces gave way to gas, and gas to electric coils. Thermostats became smaller, smarter, automatic. In offices and skyscrapers, whole climates could be created, artificial winters and summers maintained year-round. Humanity had not only conquered the cold, it had rewritten the seasons. In the 1970s, energy crises reminded the world that warmth had a price. Scientists began to study insulation, efficiency, and sustainability. Double-glazed windows, fiberglass walls, and digital thermostats transformed heating once again. Comfort became a matter not just of invention, but of conscience. The world that had once burned forests and coal mines to stay warm now learned to preserve. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the last vestiges of visible fire disappeared from most homes. In their place came quiet systems guided by algorithms and sensors. Heat pumps that drew warmth from the earth or air, radiant floors powered by electricity, and thermostats that learned human habits. The dream that began in the caves, refined in Rome, forgotten in the dark, and reborn in iron had finally reached perfection. Warmth at will, invisible and effortless.
And yet, despite the technology, something ancient endures. People still gather by fireplaces, even artificial ones, to watch the dance of flame. The sight of fire remains a comfort older than civilization. It reminds us of where we began, of cold nights and fragile sparks, of struggle and triumph. In the glow of modern screens and smart homes, warmth is no longer a matter of survival, but of memory. The hum of a furnace, the gentle rise of radiant heat underfoot, the click of a thermostat, all are echoes of the first trembling fire that once lit a cave wall in gold. From the hypocaust to the heat pump, from Rome's marble baths to the quiet pulse of modern floors, the story has come full circle. Humanity no longer fears the cold. It has learned to shape warmth itself, to summon it, measure it, and master it. And so, as winter settles over the world, a single truth remains constant. Warmth is not just a gift of fire, it is a testament to the enduring will of humankind. The light that flickered in the darkness has never gone out. It only changed shape, waiting for each new generation to rediscover what the first builders of Rome already knew, that in the heart of every home, beneath the stone and steel, the ancient fire still burns. The night was calm, the city below glimmering with points of light that pulsed like scattered embers. Behind glass windows and steel walls, warmth hummed softly, steady, invisible, constant. It flowed through pipes and vents, whispered through coils and wires, guided by sensors and silent algorithms. There were no flames anymore, no wood to split, no smoke curling toward the stars, and yet in every room, humanity still lived in the same golden glow that had once flickered inside a cave. This was the end of the journey, and, in a way, the beginning of another. The story of warmth is the story of humankind itself. From the trembling flame that kept our ancestors alive through endless winters, to the radiant floors that hum beneath our feet today, the quest has always been the same: to hold light against the dark. For thousands of years, warmth had been a battle. Fire was both friend and threat, gift and burden. It demanded obedience, faith, and endless work. To feed the flame was to feed life itself. But now, fire no longer ruled us. We ruled it. We had bottled the sun, hidden it in walls and wires, made it answer to our touch. The ancient fear of freezing nights was conquered. The dream of every generation, the comfort of steady heat, was fulfilled. And yet the flame was never truly just about heat. It was about hope, about survival, curiosity, and the need to create. Every spark humanity ever struck, every furnace built, every wall warmed, was a declaration of existence, a promise whispered against the cold void of the universe. We endure.
If the first fire was survival, the hypocaust was civilization. The medieval hearth was endurance. The Renaissance stove was rebirth. The industrial boiler was power. And now, in the 21st century, warmth has become knowledge itself, measured, designed, optimized, and sustained.
We no longer see it as a miracle, but as a right. And in that quiet assumption lies the greatest triumph of all, the transformation of miracle into mastery. Look closer, though, and the past still breathes within the present. Beneath our feet, radiant floors echo the hypocausts of Rome. Smart thermostats trace their lineage to the clever valves and vents of ancient engineers. Even the gentle hum of a modern heat pump carries the same spirit that once crackled in a fire pit beside a Stone Age hunter. The technology has changed, but the heartbeat of warmth has not. Imagine for a moment that the first fire still burns, that its glow has never gone out, only evolved. Each generation added something to it: the stones of Greece, the pipes of Rome, the tiles of Persia, the furnaces of London, the circuits of Silicon Valley. The flame spread across continents and centuries, changing shape but never purpose. It has always meant the same thing: life made bearable, beauty made possible, time itself extended. And yet, even now, warmth carries both power and peril. The systems that heat our homes are part of the same engines that warm our planet. The comfort that shields us also reminds us of our responsibility to master heat without letting it consume. The story that began in a cave now reaches into the sky, where satellites monitor the Earth's temperature, and humanity stands once again at the edge of discovery, learning not how to make more warmth, but how to balance it. Still, in quiet moments, the flame remains a companion. A cabin fireplace flickers in a winter's night. A candle burns beside a sleeping child. A campfire crackles beneath the same stars that watched our ancestors. The light dances on faces, on stories, on dreams. It is smaller now, gentler, but no less sacred. Somewhere, deep in the earth, the remnants of an ancient Roman hypocaust still lie beneath the soil, cold, silent, and broken. But if you could stand there, in the ruins, and listen carefully, you might still feel it, the faint warmth of history itself, radiating through time. The echo of hands that built, minds that imagined, hearts that refused to freeze. We are their legacy, the keepers of fire, the stewards of heat. The journey that began with a spark will never truly end. For as long as humans seek comfort, love, and life, the flame will endure. And so, the story closes where it began, with fire, a trembling light against endless darkness, a promise that no winter lasts forever. Because in every age, in every corner of the world, in every breath of heat that rises from stone or circuit, the message is the same. The fire still burns.